Section 15 of Astounding Stories 16, April 1931. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jennifer Fournier, Centerville, Virginia, USA. Astounding Stories 16, April 1931. By Various. 4 Miles Within. Chapter 3. You Haven't the Guts.
"Just as I thought," said James Quaid in the silence that fell when the last echoes had died away, and the splinters of steel and rock had settled. "You see, Professor, this earth borer belongs to me. Yes, I built one too. But I couldn't, unfortunately, get it working properly. That is, in time to get down here first. After all, I'm not a scientist, and remembered little enough of your borer's plans. It's probably young Holmes who's dropped in on us. Shall we see?" David Guinness and his daughter were speechless with dread. Quaid had trained the searchlight on the borer, and by turning their heads they could see it plainly. It was all too clear that the machine was a total wreck. It had pitched over onto one side, its shell cracked and mangled irreparably. Grotesque pieces of crumpled metal lay all around it. Its slanting course had tumbled it within 15 yards of the sphere. In silence, the old man and the girl watched Quaid walk deliberately over to it, his automatic steady in his right hand. He wrenched at the long, narrow door, but it was so badly bent that for a while he could not get it open. At last it swung out, however, and Quaid peered inside. After a moment, he reached in and drew out a rifle. He took it over to a nearby rock, smashed the gun's breech, then flung it, useless, aside. Returning to the borer, he again peered in. Sue was about to scream from the torturous suspense when he at last straightened up and looked around at the white-faced girl and her father. "Mr. Holmes is tougher than I'd thought possible," he said with a thin smile. "He's still alive." And, as Sue gasped with relief, he added, "Would you like to see him?" He dragged the young man's unconscious body roughly out on the floor. There were several bad bruises on his face and head, but otherwise he was apparently uninjured. As Quaid stood over him, playing idly with the automatic, he stirred and blinked, and at last, with an effort, got up on one elbow and looked straight at the thin lips and narrowed eyes of the man standing above. He shook his head, trying to comprehend, then muttered hazily, You're Quaid?" Quaid did not have time to answer, for Sue Guinness cried out, "Phil! Are you all right?" Phil stared stupidly around, caught sight of the two who lay bound on the floor, and staggered to his feet. "Sue!" he cried, relief and understanding flooding his voice. He started towards her. "Stand where you are!" Quaid snapped harshly, and the automatic in his hand came up. Holmes peered at it and stopped, but his blood-streaked face settled into tight lines, and his body tensed. "You'd better," continued Quaid. "Now tell me what happened to Juan." Phil forced himself to be calm. "Your pal, the greaser," he said cuttingly. "He's lying on a bunk in your shack. He shot himself, playing with a gun." Quaid chose not to notice the way Phil said this, but a little of the suave self-confidence was gone from his face as he said, "Well, in that case, I'll have to hurry back to the surface to attend to him. But don't be alarmed," he added more brightly. "I'll be back for you all in an hour or so." At this, David Guinness struggled frantically with his bonds and yelled, "Don't believe him, Phil! He's going to leave us here to starve and die! He told us so just before you came down." Quaid's face twitched perceptibly. His eyes were nervous. "Is that true, Quaid?" Holmes asked. There was a steely note in his voice. "Why, no, of course not," the other said hastily, uncertain whether to lie or not. "Of course I didn't." Phil Holmes looked square into his eyes. He bluffed. "You couldn't desert us, Quaid. You haven't the guts. You haven't the guts. His face and eyes burned with the contempt that was in his words. It cut Quade to the raw, but he could not avoid Phil's eyes. He stared at them for a full moment, trembling slightly. Slowly, by inches, he started to back toward the sphere. Then suddenly he ran for it with all his might, Holmes after him. Quade got to it first, and inside, as he yanked in the searchlight and slammed and locked the door, he yelled, "You'll see, you damn pup! You'll see!" And there was the smothered sound of half-maniacal laughter. Phil threw all his weight against the metal door, but it was hopeless, and he knew it. He had gathered himself for another rush when he heard Guinness yell, "Back, Phil! Back! He'll turn on the side disintegrators!" Mad with rage as the young man was, he at once saw the danger and leaped away, only to almost fall over the professor's prone body. With hurrying, trembling fingers, he untied the pair's bonds, and they struggled to their feet, cramped and stiff. Then it was Phil who warned them. "Back as far as you can! Hurry!" He grabbed Sue's hand and plunged toward the uncertain protection of a huge rock far in the rear. At once he made them lie flat on the ground. As yet the sphere had not stirred nor emitted a whisper of sound, though they knew the man inside was conning the controls in a fever of haste to leave the cavern. But they hadn't long to wait. There came a sputter, a starting cough from the rocket tubes beneath the sphere. Quickly they warmed into life, and the dully glimmering ball rocked in the hole it lay in. Then a cataract of noise unleashed itself. A devastating thunder roared through the echoing cavern as the rockets burst into full force. A wave of brilliant orange-red splashed out from under the sphere, licked back up its sides, and seemed literally to shove the great ball up towards the hole in the ceiling. Its ascent was very slow. As it gained height it looked, save for its speed, like a fantastic meteor flaming through the night. For the orange plumage that streamed from beneath lit the ball with dazzling color. A glowing sphere, it staggered midway between floor and ceiling, creeping jerkily upwards. "He's not going to hit the hole!" shouted Guinness. The borer had not risen in a perfectly straight line. It jarred against the rim of the hole, and wavered uncertainly. Every second the roar of its rockets, swollen by echoes, rose in a savage crescendo. The faces of the three who watched were painted orange in the glow. The sphere was blind. The man inside could judge his course only by the feel. As the three who were deserted watched, hoping ardently that Quade would not be able to find the opening, the left side rockets spouted lances of fire, and they knew he had discovered the way to maneuver the borer laterally. The new flames welded with the exhaust of the main tubes into a great fan-shaped tail, so brilliant, and shot through with other colors that their eyes could not stand the sight except in winks. The borer jerked to the right, but still it could not find the hole. Then the flames lessened for a moment, and the borer sank down, to rise again a moment later. Its ascent was so labored that Phil shouted to Professor Guinness, "Why so slow?" And the inventor told him that which he had not seen for the intolerable light. "Only half his rockets are on!" This time the sphere was correctly aimed, however, and it roared straight into the hole. Immediately the fierce sound of the exhaust was muffled, and in a few seconds only the fiery plumage, shooting down from the ceiling, showed where the machine was. Then this disappeared, and the noise alone was left. Phil leaped forward, intending to stare up, but Guinness's yell halted him. "Not yet! He might still use the disintegrators!" For many minutes they waited, till the muffled exhaust had died to a drone. There was a puzzled expression on the professor's face as the three at last walked over and dared peer up into the hole. Far above, the splash of orange lit the walls of the tunnel. "That's funny," the old man muttered. "He's only using half the rockets, about 10. I thought he'd turn them all on when he got into the hole, but he didn't. Either they were damaged in the fall, or Quade doesn't see fit to use them." "Half of them are enough," said Phil bitterly, and put his arm around the quiet girl standing next to him. Together, a silent little group, They watched the spot of orange die to a pinpoint, watched it waver, twinkle, ever growing smaller, and then it was gone. Gone! Back to the surface of the earth, to the normal world of reality, only 4 miles above them, a small enough distance on the surface itself, and yet it might have been 1,000,000 miles, so utterly were they barred from it. The same thought was in their minds, though none of them dared express it. They were thinking of the serene desert, and the cool wind, and the buttes, and the high hills, placid in the moonlight. Of the hushed rise of the dawn, the first flush of the sun that was so achingly lovely on the desert, the sun they would never see again, buried in a lifeless world of gloom 4 miles within, and buried alive, and not alive for long. But that way lay madness. Phil Holmes drove the horrible thoughts from his brain, and forced a smile to his face. "Well, that's that," he said in a voice meant to be cheerful. The dim cavern echoed his words mockingly. With the earth borer gone, the man-made machine that had dared break a solitude undisturbed since the earth first cooled, the great cavern seemed to return to its awful original mood. The 3 dwarfed humans became wholly conscious of it. They felt it almost a living thing, stretching vastly around them, tightening its unheard spell on them. Its smell of moldy earth and rocks down which water slowly dripped filled their nostrils and somehow added to their fear. As they looked about, their eyes became accustomed to the dim, eerie, phosphorescent illumination. They saw little worm-like creatures now and again appear from tiny holes between stalagmites in the jagged floor, and, as Phil wondered in his mind how long it would be before they would be reduced to using them for food, a strange, mole-sized animal scraped from the darkness and pecked at one of them. As it slithered away, a writhing shape in its mouth, Holmes muttered bitterly, "A competitor." Vague, flitting forms haunted the gloom among the stalactites of the distorted ceiling, hints of the things that lived in the terrible silence of this nether world. Here time had paused, and life had halted in primate form. A little moan came from Sue Guinness's pale lips. She plucked at her arm. A sickly white worm, only 1 inch long, had fallen on it from the ceiling. "Oh," she gasped. "Oh." Phil drew her closer to him, and walked with her over to Quade's wrecked borer. "Let's see what we've got here," he suggested cheerfully. The machine was over on its side, the metal mangled and crushed beyond repair. Nevertheless, he squeezed into it. "Stand back," he warned. "I'm going to try its rockets." There was a click of broken machinery, and that was all. "Rockets gone," Phil muttered. He pulled another lever over. There was a sputter from within the borer, then a furious roar that sent great echoes beating through the cavern. A cloud of dust reared up before the bottom of the machine, whipped madly for a moment, and sank as the bellow of sound died down. Sue saw that a rocky rise in the floor directly in front of the disintegrators had been planed off levelly. Phil scrambled out. "The disintegrators work," he said, "but a lot of good they do us. The borer's hopelessly cracked." He shrugged his shoulders, and with a discouraged gesture cast to the ground a coil of rope he had found inside. Then suddenly he swung around. "Professor!" he called to the old figure, standing bowed beneath the hole in the ceiling. "There's a draft blowing from somewhere. Do you feel it?" Guinness felt with his hands a moment, and nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "It's coming from this way," Sue said excitedly, pointing into the darkness on one side of the cavern. "And it goes up the hole we made in the ceiling." Phil turned eagerly to the old inventor. "It must come from somewhere," he said, "and that somewhere may take us toward the surface. Let's follow it." "We might as well," the other agreed wearily. His was the tone of a man who has only a certain time to live. But Phil was more eager. "While there's life, there's hope," he said cheerfully. "Come on, Sue, Professor!" And he led the way forward toward the dim, distorted rock shapes in the distance. The roof and sides of the cavern angled down into a rough, tunnel-like opening from which the draft swept. It was a heavy air, weighted with the smell of moist earth and lifeless water and a nameless, flat, stale gas. They slowly made their way through the impeding stalagmites, surrounded by a dark blur of shadows, the ghostly phosphorescent light illuminating well only the few rods around them. Utter silence brooded over the tunnel. Phil paused when they had gone about 75 feet. "I left that rope behind," he said, "and we may need it. I'll return and get it, and you both wait right here." With the words he turned and went back into the shadows. He went as fast as he could, not liking to leave the other two alone. But when he had retrieved the rope and tied it to his waist, he permitted himself a last look up as he passed under the hole in the ceiling, and what he saw there tensed every muscle in his body and made his heart beat like mad. Again there was a tiny spot of orange in the blackness above. "Professor!" he yelled excitedly. "Sue! Come here! The sphere's coming back!" There was no doubt about it. The pinpoint of light was growing each second, with the flame of the descending exhausts. Guinness and his daughter ran from the tunnel, and, guided by Phil's excited ejaculations, hurried to his side. Their eyes confirmed what his had seen. The earth borer was coming down. "But," Guinness said bewilderedly, "those rockets were enough to lift him." This was a mystery. Even though 10 rockets were on, 10 tiny spots of orange flame, the sphere came down swiftly. The same force which some time before had lifted it slowly up was now insufficient. The roar of the tubes rose rapidly. "Get back!" Phil ordered, remembering the danger, and they all retreated to the mouth of the tunnel, ready to peep cautiously around the edge. Holmes's jaws were locked tight with grim resolution. Quade was coming back, he told himself exultantly. This time he must not go up alone. This time... But his half-formed resolutions were idle. He could not know what frightful thing was bringing Quade down, what frightful experience was in store for them all. End of chapter 3.